Hey, I don't know if anybody said it to you yet today, but we are so glad that you are at church. At Riverwood here, of course, you are one of 7 worship communities that are gathering together to worship and to connect, which is amazing. Hey, just before we get into the message, I want to let you know that we made a mistake. We screwed up. It was a clerical mistake. It was a counting mistake. We put out these tickets for our Swazi team safari. Of course, our team is going to be going. We got a team of about 21, 22 that are going to be heading to Eswatini, Africa in about 2 weeks. And the team is all getting ready. And we were getting ready to take a bunch of kids on a field trip and safari. And we misprinted our tickets. We didn't print enough and we miscalculated. And so going into this weekend, we're about halfway there. It turns out we also miscounted how many people we're actually taking on safari. There's going to be 350 people that we're taking, kids and go-go's and the shepherds and the Swazi workers, and many of them have never been on a field trip or a safari before. We get the opportunity to give them this incredible experience with our team. However, we need to make this thing happen. So we've got tickets here. We've got a zebra for $70. We've got you can buy a lion for $40, or you can buy a rhino for $100. And this is the big weekend where we need to make this happen. We're halfway there. We would love for you to step up and help us out at the Welcome Center or online. And of course, here's the deal. I think for many of us, whatever we buy in terms of any of those animals, we'll probably feel it for all of about 3 seconds. But the experience that we're going to provide for our team to be with these kids is going to last more than a day. It's going to last for a lifetime, and it's an opportunity to serve these kids, which is such a great opportunity. Hey, would you join with me and let's prepare our hearts for our teaching time. Heavenly Father, we've had a chance to declare that you are the King. You are the King of our lives. You are the King of everything that exists, and we worship you. God, we've had a chance to strategize a little bit around some connecting points and some opportunities to make a difference in this world. And now we take time to come and to dig into your word and to consider what you're saying to us today. God, I just want to thank you that there's so many of us this morning that are going to be setting this time aside for you, for your word, for you to speak to us. And I pray that you would do that now. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, last weekend I introduced you to a guy named Harry Coover. He, of course, was the guy who accidentally, by a mistake, invented super glue, which was kind of a cool story. And then we went on to talk about how sticky grace is and the relationship glue of grace. Well, this weekend I want to introduce you to Mark Singer. Mark Singer, back in the 1990s, was a woodworker. He was a very fine woodworker. He loved to work with teak. He made very expensive and very wonderful furniture, but he had a problem. And the problem is, if you've ever worked with teak, you know that it's a wonderful, exquisite wood, but it's difficult to glue together. And so he was having a hard time gluing this stuff. And aside from that, his furniture wasn't meant for indoors or in a showroom. It was meant to sit outside, under the elements of the heat and the moisture and the rain and the sun and the real world conditions. And I read Mark's story and I came across this line that said this: Mark discovered some of the most beautiful things are also some of the hardest things to hold together. I thought, wow, that's such a description of relationships. Relationships are incredibly beautiful. They're exquisite, they're amazing, but they're also difficult to hold together. And our relationships, of course, are exposed to all kinds of weather. High pressure, stress seasons, the fog of misunderstanding, the low pressure systems of disappointment, the storms of friction, the eroding force of hurt, and the hail of careless words. All of these things wear away at our relationships, and they make relationships less than sticky. They make them hard to stick together. And so what we need is the right glue. And we began last week looking at the right glue, which is in Scripture. So Mark is out to build something beautiful that can stand up to the elements. He ends up traveling to Indonesia. And while he's in Indonesia, he goes to some woodworking, furniture-making places and is kind of poking around and discovering how they do it. And he comes across an adhesive that he's never heard of before, he's never seen before, and it has remarkable qualities. He's so taken by this glue that he finds out who the manufacturer is. He buys the rights, he brings it back to Ohio, and he begins a little company that you may have heard of, Gorilla Glue. He started this Gorilla Glue thing where it's just like this incredible adhesive that he ended up discovering in Indonesia. Well, last weekend we talked about the stickiness of grace. We were reading in our Bibles, in our chapter day challenge, Galatians and Ephesians. Now, once again, if you do not have one of these lit New Testament Bibles and the highlighter that goes with it, we have one for free at the Welcome Center. Just visit the Welcome Center. They'd love to give you one. We're on a chapter a day, read the entire New Testament in a 30-week reading plan. And this Monday morning, we are picking up on week number 24 as we continue to work our way through this. But last week we discovered that when grace is spread out generously, it has a remarkable sticky effect to hold people together. And this week, as I was reading through our chapters, and our chapters, of course, this week were in Philippians, Colossians, and 1 Thessalonians, I began to see some more glue that God has given us. Now, let me just kind of recap real quick that these books that we call books, we handled almost 3 of them this past week. They're actually letters. They're just short letters from the Apostle Paul. Philippians is the warmest of the epistles, of the letters. It's really a thank you note to this church for partnering with Paul, and it's full of joy. That's the theme of Philippians. Colossians, Paul never actually planted the church in Colossae, but this is a letter that's all about the greatness and supremacy of God. It's a wonderful letter. And then later on in the letter, he says, because of the greatness and supremacy of God, it's going to make a difference in your life. And it's even going to make a difference in your relationships. And he says this, above all these things, put on love, which binds them all together. I mean, he's literally using glue, adhesive language in how these relationships work, that love binds it all together. 1 Thessalonians, considered probably one of the first ever epistles written, is written to a church going through a difficult time. And so there's a lot of words of encouragement and strengthening in that book. But this past week, as we were reading through our chapter a day reading, I began to see a relational glue that I think Paul was importing into his world. You see, Paul had a problem. Paul lived in the ancient world, and relationships were very, very different than what we would consider relationships today. In fact, when we read the scriptures, we often put it through the lens of what we understand to be relationships, but we need to understand the lens through which he was speaking. The relationships that were in his culture were built on something completely different than what we know. You see, almost every relationship was about a pecking order. It was about a pecking order, and you needed to know your place in the pecking order. When people met on the street, when people sat down for a meal, when somebody came over to your house, when somebody began to speak publicly, you were always quietly asking, where do I fit in this pecking order and where do they fit? Who in this situation needs to be given honor and who needs to be giving the honor? Who is above the other? Because somebody is always above the other. It was an honor society. It was based on power and money and family name and status and hierarchy. In other words, this entire system of relationships was like a ladder. And you needed to know your place on the ladder. Where are you on that ladder? Who's above you? Who's below you? The whole system was based on that. The father ruled the household. The master ruled the slaves. The wealthiest man in town ruled the town. And so there was a social air so different than ours. They were breathing a social air, not that said we respect each other, there's equality, we need to make room for each other and serve one another. They had none of that. Rather, it was this ladder, and you needed to protect your place on the ladder, and you needed to know everybody else's place on the ladder. And if you needed to climb over them in order to get to a better place on that ladder. Relationships were held together with a cultural glue that eroded and failed over time. So the Holy Spirit imports a word, a sticky word into the scriptures, into Paul's life, and the purpose is to help to help the relationship stick together. Now, you need to understand that this word that we're going to look at was revolutionary at the time. It was absolutely radical. It challenged the ladder in a way that you wouldn't even believe. What Paul was talking about here was about creating a brand new community, a community that looked completely different than the ladder. A new community where you can imagine a very wealthy merchant and a laborer and a widow and a slave and a woman and a tradesman and a Jewish rabbi and some guy that just sharpens knives down at the market and he's barely making ends meet, and a slave owner, all from radically different places on the stratosphere on that ladder, all together in one room, which was unheard of, but they're all together in one room. And instead of being on a ladder, Paul uses this really radical talk about them being part of a family, them being part of a body, not a ladder, but part of a body, responsible to one another. It was revolutionary. It was reparative language, repairing what had been broken. Paul was saying the gospel isn't just saving souls, it's rewriting the social script. It needs to make a difference in your relationships. And so he imports this word, and I counted through the different books that we've been reading. 8 times it's used in Galatians, 5 in Ephesians, 2 in Philippians, 3 times in Colossians, 6 times in 1 Thessalonians, and the word is allelon. Allelon. Now you look at that word and go, doesn't do anything for me. That doesn't feel very revolutionary to me. It doesn't mean nothing. But to the people that Paul was writing to, it was a mind blower. It was absolutely radical. Allelon literally means one another, reciprocal, mutual. There's a mutuality, a reciprocalness, one another. In fact, we can use the word one anothering comes out of this word. It was simply unheard of and inconvenient, inconceivable for these people. Now, I don't expect you to take in what I'm about to show you on the screen, but I want you to understand that over 65 times this word appears in the New Testament. Look at that. I mean, it is a word that was imported and now began to get distributed throughout the New Testament in a really powerful way. Now you might be thinking, hold on, can we just slow down for a second? Okay, that's nice. You've got a Greek word, it's used 65 times, but I don't live in a Mideastern culture 2,000 years ago. I live in a really different world than that. So how does this even apply to me? Because I don't live in a pecking order, honor culture. And I would say, you're right. You don't live in a pecking order, honor culture. You live in something that is even more difficult. They had a ladder. That was the culture that they lived in. Who was above? Who's below? Who do you owe? Who owes you? That was their world, a ladder. You live in an even more challenging world of bubbles. We live in bubbles, isolation. Everything is about me, my life. We live in a world of hyper-individualism, my space, my emotions, my rage. That's what leads to digital hostility. My opinion. We build firewalls around our relationships and our souls. My brand, a curated image management. My screen. And I expect on my screen that everything's going to be curated to my preferences and what I like. People talk about my fatigue, my exhaustion, my problems. My life is curated with endless choices. Listen, Jesus did not come to build a ladder, and he didn't come to bless your bubble. Rather, he came to build a body. And this was the radicalness of allelon, a one anothering that dismantles the ladder, pops the bubble, and says we're all in this together. In fact, Romans 12:5 says this, so it is with Christ's body, we are many parts of one body, and we all belong to, there's the word, allelon, we all belong to each other. This was a radical way of thinking. But did you catch what he was saying? He was not simply saying, oh, we all go to the same worship service. We're all part of the same worship community. We all attend the same church. we all belong to the same organization, and therefore we're sort of acquainted. I mean, I haven't met everybody in the room. During coffee break, I don't necessarily get up and go meet anybody. I just kind of scroll on my phone. Oh, there's the bubble. Yeah, we're very individualized, right? But he's not saying that. He's not saying that at all. In fact, he's saying something so very different. He says we all belong to each other. We're all connected. We're all attached to one another. And then he goes on to say, look, at the eye does not say to the foot, I don't need you. I don't care about you. Your elbow doesn't say to your knee, you know what, I could care less what's going on with you. I don't need you. I don't have any responsibility to you. No, instead, his point is that we are all connected together as a body. So if you have a burden, it touches me. If you have a joy, it matters to me. If you have something that's growing in your life and happening in your life, it affects me. Your pain is not irrelevant to me. Why? Because we all belong together, because we're all a body together, not climbing a ladder, not being isolated in our little bubbles, but rather taking our place in the body and understanding that we're all part of the body. Every one of us is a part of the body, and therefore we're connected in this intrinsic way. It was absolutely radical thinking. Now, many of us have the perspective that when it comes to relationships, they just sort of happen, and they're based on feeling. And they just kind of flow along, and if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. But Paul challenges that in a powerful way through these chapters that we read this last week. In fact, the glue of relationship in Paul's mind is an others-focused awareness that moves into an others-serving action. Let me say that again. The whole idea of relationships in the body is an others-focused awareness that then results in an others-serving action. We could say that applying the glue is done in 3 steps. And I want us to kind of study some of these allelon passages. And so the first step would be this: I see them, seeing them. Seeing them is the first step. We read this in Philippians chapter 2 this past week on Tuesday. And it said this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, all worried about our little bubbles. Rather, in humility, value allelon, value others above yourself. This is a call to live so radically different than the rest of our culture. Not simply climbing the ladder, not simply isolating ourselves in a bubble. And Paul is confronting the default of our heart, because every human heart has a default, and it is me first. My preferences, my needs, my wants, my comforts, my opinion, me. And Paul says the first step to applying the relational glue of allelon, of one anothering, is to open your eyes and see one another and value one another. Now that sounds really simple, doesn't it? Open your eyes and see one another. But I want to suggest to you that it is harder than it looks. In fact, let's do a little how well you can follow things experiment. Take a look at this.
This is the shell game. I'm going to hide this Hershey's Kiss under this cup, and the object is for you to pay attention and follow along and try to guess which cup the Hershey's Kiss is under at the end. Try to guess if it's in the left cup, the middle cup, or the right cup. Let's check the left cup. The middle cup? If you guess the middle cup, you got it right. So now we're going to make it a little more complicated. I've added an extra pair of hands, and I've added additional colors here. But that's only to distract you from the pink cups. The pink cups will always have, one of the pink cups will always have the Hershey Kiss underneath. So let's get started. So can you guess where the Hershey Kiss is?
Okay, show of hands. How many of you did not see the duck? Oh, wow, okay. How many of you did not see the fifth hand? How many of you did not see the blue cups turning to green? Were you watching it all? I mean, it's a profound illustration, and it makes you wonder, if I missed all that and it was right in front of my nose, what else am I missing? Because you know what? You're missing stuff relationally. There's stuff that you are missing. And in fact, Paul says, he says this, listen, stop being so fixated on yourself. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, because your default is you, but rather in humility, value, allelon, others above yourself. Begin to see them, and not only see them, but to value them. Paul's saying we are also blinded by our self-centered, self-orientated desires, which is all part of the world, climbing the ladder and living in our bubble. But as Christ followers, we are called to live different. So train yourself to see others and to value others above yourself. So the first step in one anothering, in this applying this glue of one anothering, is to see them, a radical shift in your thinking, a radical shift in your perspective, taking your eyes off of yourself and actually seeing somebody else. So simple, it sounds so simple, but it's so hard to do. And then there are at least 65 of these one anothering statements. Now, obviously today we can't look at 65. In fact, we're only going to look at 2 that we read this past week. But the first of the 2, we read this past Friday, Colossians 3:13. And it said this, bear with each other and forgive allelon, one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. Bear with one another and forgive one another. The glue of bearing with one another is a gorilla level adhesive in relationships. It holds what is beautiful together, but gets often worn down by the elements. It holds it together. But how exactly does this bearing with one another work, and what does it look like? Well, maybe at this point, a story would help. So this past winter, earlier this winter, there was a man who rented a cabin in the Tahoe area. And he was so looking forward to just some peace and quiet, some mountain solitude. And so he rented this cabin for an extended amount of time. He moved in, got settled in, was just enjoying the amazing surroundings. And a couple of days into his stay, he begins to hear noises underneath the floorboards. They're not scratching noises. They're not just pipes, expanding and contracting. There's something else, and it doesn't sound like a mouse or a rat or a raccoon. It sounded like crying babies. And he had a hunch. And so he contacted this bear conservation league that helps kind of mitigate relationships between humans and bears in the Tahoe area. And they came and checked things out. And sure enough, there was a bear underneath his porch, or underneath his house. And this bear happened to have a name, Rose. They had recognized the bear as Rose. Rose had given birth to 3 baby cubs. Now, what you need to know is that the year earlier, Rose had given birth to cubs, but those cubs had been killed by vehicle strikes. And so they were really interested in making sure that Rose, that these cubs did well. And so they went to the cabin owner, and they said, look, we got this bear underneath. Now, you can imagine that this guy who's renting the place, his reaction. I came here for some solitude. I came here to get away from stress and problems, and now I got an entire bear family living underneath where I'm sleeping and walking? I mean, this is not only inconvenient, this is emotionally distressing, and this is very dangerous. I mean, that bear could get into the insulation, into the wiring, into the pipes. It could make a mess of everything, and you can imagine his response, but that was not his response. His response was, wow, I wonder what I can do to help this situation out, because I know if we get rid of the bears now, there's a very good chance that those cubs will not survive. And so this Bear League reports that this man turned into something of a papa bear himself. He became very, very protective and doing everything he could to help out this situation. He had to shoulder a whole lot of stuff, an unwanted burden under his feet. He had to make room for a disruption. He had to choose patience over irritation. He had to accept the inconvenience of this so that he could help others out. And as I read Colossians 3:13 this last week, bear with one another, I thought about this man because he literally was bearing with somebody else. And that's what it looks like to bear with one another. When we bear with one another, we take on the disruption. We take on the inconvenience. We take on the less than ideal circumstances and somebody else's problem and vulnerability and crisis, and we take that on. Paul is saying, look, your first instinct when you get into those situations is going to be to kick those people out, to get rid of the problem, to evict them out of your life because they're an inconvenience. But instead, bear with one another because grace makes room for imperfect people. That renter was not just tolerating a nuisance, he was protecting something fragile. He was making room. He was creating a little pocket of mercy underneath his floorboards. Listen, there are people in your life who are making some noise underneath the floorboards. They're disrupting your peace. They're making life a little bit more inconvenient. And you're having to bear with them. Paul says, adjust your soul so that you actually bear with them well. First thing to do is to see them. Shift your perspective from self to others, and this is the calling that Christ puts on us. Secondly is to bear with them. The third step is to flood them with love. On Sunday, today, we read 1 Thessalonians 3:12. This is a prayer that Paul has for the Thessalonians. May the Lord make your love increase and overflow for allelon each other, towards each other, and for each other, for everyone, just as ours does for you. He's saying, look, you need to allelon, you need to let this love flow. Now, what does this love flow look like? There's actually a Greek word right before that I studied that is very fascinating. It literally means, the word before that we read, increase and overflow, literally means to superabound. He's not just saying, hey, add a little bit of love to your life. Love a little bit more. He's saying you ought to be a person, not who's climbing ladders, not who's living in a bubble, but you ought to be a person who is superabounding, overflowing, with an endless supply of overflow. You know, a few years ago on a very cold February night, something happened in our fire hall, 1906 fire hall office building, and nobody knew it. We have a tower that used to be the hose tower. It's not insulated. It got brutally cold that night. And when we walked in the morning, we discovered that a pipe had burst and had spewed water at full pressure all night without anybody knowing. And so we saw as the washroom ceiling had caved in. We watched as this waterfall had gone down the stairs. We watched as the water found its way into the walls and into the cracks and the crannies and poured down onto the main floor, flooding the main floor, and then down into the basement, into the kids' area, and into the electrical rooms and all that. It was unbelievable. It was like we had tapped into something that had no end to its source. In fact, to give you a little bit of a sense of what it felt like, here's a little bit of video. Yeah, it felt like we had tapped into this like endless reservoir of water, which we actually had, and it just kept pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring. That's what superabounding is like. You tap into an inexhaustible reservoir, and you burst a pipe, and you just pour and pour and pour. You superabound, you overflow. There isn't a corner of your life that isn't soaked and drenched and touched by water. Well, that's what Paul's talking about here. He's not saying, hey, add a little bit of love to your life. You know, maybe a little thimbleful of love that you can be a little more patient, maybe a few more drops of patience. No, he's praying that they will tap into a source that is not of themselves. This isn't something you work up. This isn't something you say, I'm going to become much better at superabounding. No, you need to tap into the endless reservoir and simply burst a pipe and allow that love to pour out of you. That's what he's talking about. In other words, Paul is not calling for us to have carefully measured love or politically correct love or polite love or just a little bit of love. He's calling us to flood the room. To flood whatever room, whatever family you are in, wherever you work, to flood it. And that means the kind of love that soaks the conversation in love, that runs down the hallway, that finds the broken places, the cracks, and touches every corner and leaves nothing dry of this love. This is one anothering at full pressure. Listen, you have somebody difficult in your life. And the Lord today is telling you, listen, I'm calling you to bear with them. There's going to be some noises under the floorboards. It's going to be a little bit inconvenient, but you can do it because you're going to tap into a source that is far beyond you. And He's calling us to superabound in this love, to tap into what He has for us. So you might be feeling dry yourself. You might be feeling empty. You might be feeling like, I don't have anything else to give. He says, hey, listen, come to the endless reservoir. Tap into me, and you will be able to see people. And as you see people, you'll be able to value them, see things that you were missing. You'll be able to bear with them, and you'll be able to superabound in love towards them. Christians are not called to simply have a trickle of love coming out of them. They're called to be super abundant. Listen, you might bump into some people this week that are climbing the ladder. We don't live by the ladder. You're probably going to bump into some people who are living in a bubble of isolation. Don't climb into your own bubble of isolation. Don't go with the world, but rather realize you're part of the body. You're intrinsically connected to others who are a part of Christ, and we are on a mission. And this is part of our mission, to love people well with the gorilla glue of the one anothering, seeing them, bearing with them, and superabounding, flooding them with a love that isn't even from us, but comes from Him.